Hello and welcome to another edition of Two
Irish
Guys Discussing Software.
That's quite good. I like that.
Yeah, we didn't even practice.
We changed it up on the fly.
On the fly. Yeah, I just thought of it a moment ago. Yes, welcome. My name is Tomás O'Leary, and that is the lovely voice of my good friend and colleague Brendan Walsh. We're here, as always, every month to talk about the stories in the world of the software mega vendors, what's going on, what industry news, who's buying who, any gossip. I'm not sure how much we have on the gossip front this week. A little bit, hopefully. We love to talk about the mega vendors. And of course, there's always one we love to talk about more than everybody else. It is IBM. And we have a little story today. We've got a great guest because today the topic is about the mainframe and is the mainframe dead. I think they've been talking about that since the mainframe was developed. Certainly, we'll talk a little bit about it in a while. 1991, some guy called Stuart Alsop claimed that the last mainframe would be unplugged inside 5 years. I actually wonder, was he still alive? We'll soon find out. Because we're being joined by an absolute expert and legend in the IBM mainframe world and System Z Systems, as I've been calling it, or I think it's just called Z now, or Z possibly. Paul Arnerich, who is a good friend of mine and is joining us shortly from the UK. He has been in this business for more years than I care to remember.
He might actually outlive the mainframe himself. He's been around for so long.
Yes, we hope he does. We hope he does, for sure. But before we join Paul and talk about the mainframe is dead, how are you?
That's a good one. I don't know. I'm going to get emotional. I'm tired, very busy, overworked. I've learned something though this week, which is never let two key employees go on holidays at the same time. You should have discussed this with Todd. At our last podcast, Todd, his leadership stuff, he's really good at that. Yeah, well, I thought I could handle it, and I've realised, the world has moved on.
I'm really glad we put you in a leadership role.
Well, you see, I'm good at delegating now and not doing, right? So now I'm having to do all the do this week, and it's catching up with me. But
do I want to tell Michael to stop the recording here now? We'll have a kind of heart-to-heart.
The violins are out, but look, it's all good. It's only a week, and next week it'll hopefully be back to normal.
Well, the good news is actually we're, unlike the last couple of podcasts, we're across the table from each other.
Which was awkward.
It's kind of tricky doing these podcasts.
It's a bit like those, remote webinars or remote trade shows. It's just not the same. It's together.
You had one of those.
Well, I won't mention any names. But
do tell us what happened though.
Well, I mean, it's all about preparation, right? So, and moderation. But I was probably on, the most car crash webinar yesterday. I was actually going to be presenting.
It is recorded, so they won't be going out yet.
Fireside chat. No, thankfully there was a recording, but the recording is going to happen again next week. We're going to have another go, but and we have our sound guys and our creative guys to help us get this thing set up. But nothing was working. The sound wasn't working. We got the sound back on. We refreshed, deleted our cached and turned off our browsers, rebooted our laptops. Everybody was green. We were set to go. The next thing, the wrong slides were appearing. Got the right slides. All systems go, ready to go. And as soon as we started, I was asked a question and the next chap was asked a question. And as soon as he started talking, nothing was coming out. So he was green, ready to go. Nothing was happening. And then eventually he fixed his mic, put on about 3 different headsets. You could see him in the window. So everybody who would be watching the recorded webinar would be able to see. But then as soon as he came on, it was... which is not a great sound.
No.
When it's, for a webinar. And so that was an hour of my day yesterday that I won't get back.
Oh, God.
But I felt sorry for the hosts. We've all been there. And but it kind of summed up my week.
Well, we shouldn't be admitting this, but we had exactly the same issue about 6 weeks ago. Exact same issue. Everything worked. It's like as if the technology knows you're about to do something really important, and I'm just gonna plug it out and stop it working just as you go live. So we had a webinar. We were on 25-30 minutes beforehand. We tested it all previously. We had to go live, and just as we go live, the other person doing the webinar, live webinar, is not at the end of it.
Oh dear.
His mic stops working.
Yeah.
And it ended up I had to do his slides. So
and he was the techie.
He was the guy who knew what he was talking about. So it was, it's tricky.
So it just goes to show, with all the technology, and all the advancement and all of this going online,
And who is the winner then? Who is the winner?
Well, right now,
because there's guys who make this stuff and they still make a lot of money, don't they?
Look, so right now, and we weren't using the technology of the so-called winner. We were using one I hadn't actually used before. I won't mention the name because it wouldn't be fair. But Zoom right now is the winner. And
worth more than IBM.
Worth more than IBM.
Sorry, I took that out of your mouth.
Yeah, no, it's okay. No, this is a duet. I mean, mouth-watering are some of the figures really around this. So, Zoom worth more than IBM. Their market cap is now 105 billion. So just take it out of that. Their stock price has grown by 500% year to date. And it is because of remote working, remote networking. It's being used by lots of businesses, obviously, and individuals globally to connect. They're worth more than IBM and close in valuation to companies like Boeing, who were only worth 100 billion, and 3M, who were worth about 95 billion. So it's hard to believe. The demand has gone crazy. Their stock price has rallied 40% in a week. They posted Q2 earnings, which were 664 million, which is a 355% rise year on year. They now have 370,000 customers, which is up 458% year on year. It's just crazy.
Wow.
But from a valuation perspective, it's 170 times earnings per share or 50 times revenue guidance. So it's crazy.
This is ludicrous. These tools, like you compare that to an airplane that Boeing makes, the complexity. Not belittling it, but of course it's great technology and we all use it.
How long does it take to design a new aircraft and get it going, and the amount of money that's poured into that from an investor's perspective, and yet something where you go and chat with somebody else online, which some of the time doesn't work, as we know from yesterday's. I won't want to. It's called an SS. You can guess what But if you look at the numbers, right? So in FY 2020, the revenues were 623 million compared to 77 billion for IBM, yet they're worth more, or compared to 76 billion for said airline or 3M. So it's crazy, yeah.
There's a bubble here, though. We talked about this a few times. This has to be.
Yeah, they're currently the leader and they're exploiting the current situation. But what's going to happen is, what will happen is the likes of Facebook, the likes of Google, the guys with the big money war chests will catch up. And I see them being overtaken. There's no way that Alphabet and Facebook and Microsoft are going to let these guys, have their, eat all their lunch,
And is it going up? Remember SoftBank were found as the whale, apparently, putting all this money on the bet on a rising market and caused the actual market to rise in the first place. There must be caught up in that. There has to be there's a bubble there.
Well, the story of the week is coming up, and I'll share some more, staggering numbers with you. It's crazy that it is. But look at Oracle. So, most quarters we get on here and we talk about Oracle and we compare them year on year, and they don't seem to be doing as well. But actually, they're even up. Their Q1 results were out, and they're up. The revenue was 9.37 billion, which was ahead of 9.2 billion a year ago, which is better than most other quarters. They haven't been faring as well. They've cited a number of things, some big wins with McDonald's moving over their financial systems over to Oracle Cloud, and Albertsons, a big North American retailer, also moving to their cloud technology. And they also cite Zoom as being one of their big revenue generators, that their Zoom revenue, we just mentioned Zoom.
We talked about that a few episodes ago.
Yeah, well, obviously Zoom runs they won the Zoom deal. Zoom now runs on the Oracle Cloud, and the Zoom revenue they mentioned is up 200%. Where it was only a couple of quarters ago. So they actually mentioned Zoom specifically as being a big revenue contributor. And
they bought a new client.
They did buy a new client. Well, did they? Well, there's a lot of confusion around that. It depends who you read. So, some of the players. We've got Oracle, Larry Ellison, Paula Trumps.
We're talking about TikTok here now.
Yeah, we're talking about TikTok. So
I want to ask you what TikTok
who is TikTok? Yeah, so you don't know. Your daughter uses TikTok.
I've seen TikTok on Twitter.
You've probably heard it through your house because I wake up every morning and the first sound I hear is not of the birds tweeting, it's of TikTok because my daughter has it on constant usage. So it's a Chinese platform for mobile video sharing, essentially, mostly used by younger folks. It's owned by a company called ByteDance out of Beijing, founded in 2012, so it's not that old. 800 million users, about 2 billion downloads of the app, but it's also used by 100 million US, I guess, people, right? And all that data is currently being served up on Chinese-based servers. So the White House Committee on Foreign Investment has stepped in here, as has Trump, saying there's a security risk, there's a national security issue if the data that's being passed back to the Chinese service can be used by the Chinese for whatever means. Depends on what side of the political spectrum you sit. Trump obviously is a pro-Oracle and favours Oracle to win the deal. Microsoft scuppered their chances of winning the deal because they said it was a security risk they couldn't fix during the negotiations, so they're out. There was an executive order from Trump saying that it had to be sold and control of the technology had to be in US hands by the end of September. He put some kind of arbitrary date on it. Otherwise, it'll be banned due to national security issues. The Chinese themselves have come out and said that they're imposing a restriction on the sale of core technology to foreign companies, and they think that...
I heard they stopped the sale of the algorithm. That was what Microsoft wanted. This is what I heard. Yeah. There was a very interesting podcast last week by the Journal, they're owned by the Wall Street Journal, and they were talking about this, saying Microsoft were only interested in it with the algorithm, and then the Chinese government at the end of August said, we will obviously want to control who's buying it, and we will allow a US buyer, but you will not get the algorithm. And I actually made the deal not interesting for Microsoft.
They're not buying the IP.
Yeah, but the word on the street was when Oracle were interested. I mean, when I heard about it, we laughed about this about a month ago, thinking, what was this all about? I thought it was a joke. Quite honestly, what the hell? Oracle
why do they want
going to buy TikTok? Yeah, actually, they're buying a customer.
They're buying a customer, yeah.
But are they? This is the thing. I mean, it's still not clear what the final price is. It's still not clear the structure. There's obviously talk about Walmart also being involved. Is that correct?
Yeah, Walmart are going to be the main merchandiser. They'll have about 7%.
Okay.
Oracle will have about...
So are the details now clear, or are they still unclear? Because when Trump was talking about this, he said that he wanted two things. He said he wants to be it was a sell. It doesn't sound like it's a sale because they're talking about
partnerships,
right? And he wanted to get a slice for the US Treasury, which is fair enough. He wanted that, whether it was realistic or not. But there doesn't seem to be any slice. I mean, other than the headquarters going to the United States, doesn't seem to be any slice for them.
Yeah. You know? So TikTok Global, which is going to be the trading entity, is going to be owned 20% by Oracle and Walmart. Yeah. Then TikTok or ByteDance will own the rest of the 80%, but within a year they have to go public, at which time they expect that most of the ownership of the company will be in American hands. As it stands today, 30% of ByteDance is actually owned by US investors.
Well, at least I know what TikTok is now.
Yeah. Well, so the famous story of TikTok is that it was used during the Tulsa rally. So a whole bunch of TikTok users went on and started buying the free tickets to the rally, told their colleagues they were buying them, they weren't going, started off a frenzy, everybody bought the tickets, and this happened through TikTok. It happened through the social media of TikTok. And when Trump turned up to his rally, it was empty because everybody who bought the tickets had bought them.
Kind of mean now.
No, totally mean. And that's why Trump wants it to be sold.
Yeah. Well, he is kind of sensitive. Speaking of sensitive, there's a big story around somebody who's sensitive.
There is.
Or a company that's very sensitive, because I had to look it up. When you told me you were doing a story about Snowflake, I was like, I'm afraid I mean, I know I'm plugged into the software world, but I hadn't a clue who Snowflake were. But
I do have a big hang up on snowflakes, and my sister-in-law is always chastising me of the fact that I give out about 20 somethings and how sensitive they are, and that they can't do a day's work, etc.
Don't tell me you call your sons and daughters snowflakes.
I call them snowflakes all the time, but anyway, she tells me to move on. But this is about Snowflake. Who are Snowflake? Again, founded in 2012, the same as TikTok. So
and us.
Surprising. And ourselves, yeah. So they're a data warehouse provider. and they've just had the largest software IPO ever. And so what do? They do
how much?
Data warehousing. Well, I'll tell you in a second. Data warehousing, faster, easier, and more flexible. So I don't know if there's any kind of distinguishing features there, but let me give you a few facts, right? So they were founded in 2012 with seed capital of $1 million. Right. In 2012, they were founded in 2012, seed capital $1 million. And in 2020, they raised $479 million in a funding round in February 2020, raising their valuation to $12.4 billion. So that's in February of this year. Okay. Their revenue has doubled in the last 6 months to $242 million. But they've just had a closing valuation on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol SNOW at 70 billion valuation. They sold 28 million shares and raised 3.4 billion. So to a 70 billion valuation in February this year, the valuation was 12 billion.
70 billion. That's nearly as much as our friends IBM.
So very shortly, we won't be talking about Zoom. We're going to be talking about
Snowflake.
The Snowflake. So an incredible story, and more mouth-watering, valuations that I just can't get my head around.
Are we any stories on our good friends IBM?
Yeah, well, so one last story. Really, it's something we've talked about in previous podcasts, and in this particular podcast, we talked about alleged discrimination by IBM over older workers. But now we have the tech giant. We have a letter from the US EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who wrote to IBM saying they were discriminating against older workers because they made layoffs between about 2013 and 2018. Basically, they were saying that there was evidence that older employees were laid off because their skills were out of date, and that they were brought back under contract by IBM at lower rates, lower pay, and fewer benefits. So the EEOC said this was company-wide systemic discrimination, and that some of it actually was allegedly also not just age-rated, but also potentially racist discrimination, which IBM pushed back on, as you can imagine.
Yeah. It's a shame they're not as discriminating against their old technology as they are against their old people. Because actually in the mainframe world, which is the old IBM systems that are still around, and even though Stuart Alsop, as I said earlier, claimed that it would be gone by 1996, still knocking around. Lots and lots of stories, even recently in the last few years, people talking about IBM's reliance on it for profitability. There's a guy called Tony Sacconaghi.
That's easy for you to say.
Yeah. For working for Alliance Bernstein, who's actually been commenting, has been on CNBC and a bunch of different areas, been quoted in a number of media publications. He's talked about their reliance on the mainframe, talking about the levels of profitability. Like its revenue generator is in the single digits, but actually its level of profitability and importance to IBM from a profit perspective, when you count all of the global services contracts that they have in outsourcing deals, is as much as 40% of their profits.
Wow.
It's huge, absolutely huge. But yet it's still around. And even actually when you look at the mainframe sales, look at the results that IBM brought out during the summer, their Q2 sales, there's IBM's mainframe systems revenue were up 69%. 69% growth. Wow. That was up following a 59% increase in Q1. When everything else is weak, the mainframe, now it's single digits, but it's still an enormous contributor. It's an enormous contributor.
That's surprising when everything else, as we've just read about, is going to the cloud and going off. The tin is being dismantled, and
they're not. But they're also not getting. I mean, even the story we had earlier in a couple of podcasts back in May, when we did a podcast looking at the welfare systems in the United States. So COBOL. I mean, getting rid of people. There's no link here. I mean, I'd love this. Is a perfect time to bring Paul Arnerich on the call. Paul, are you with us?
I am indeed. Hi, gents.
Paul,
hey, Paul.
It's great to talk to you. We know each other for a long time. I'd consider you a good friend, and somebody certainly in this space who knows the mainframe probably better than none. I was actually looking at how long you've been doing this, and in the notes that were prepared by the team here, it says Paul has been working with IBM Mainframe System Z and its predecessors since the 1970s. Now, to be fair, it was 1979. Was that right?
Yeah. It's a bit of a cheat saying the 70s, isn't it? The 70s would be a better description.
That was the year the Pope came to Ireland. Pope John Paul II. He came to Ireland in 1979 when you started in the mainframe world. Tell us, I'm calling it the main. Sorry, Paul?
Was that the first unveiling of the Pope Mobile as well?
Oh, good question. I don't know. He came to 1 million people in the Phoenix Park, a park in the middle of Dublin. And I think in total, the population of Ireland at the time was in the south of Ireland was about 3.5 million, maybe just above that. And I think a total of 2 million people saw him. It was incredible. I mean, talk about the world changing since COVID. I mean, in this country, we've seen a massive change in a short period of time. But we are looking at bring the conversation back to you, the mainframe, Paul, and I'm calling it the mainframe. Am I actually calling it by the correct name? It's because it's changed its name quite a few times from Z Systems or Z Systems, as they might call it in the United States. System Z. I think it's Z now, isn't it? Or am I correct there?
It's been through a few iterations. I mean, the mainframe is what it's probably best known as. It's a very handy phrase because at least it lets Tom Cruise, hack into things that no one knows about, right? And all those movies.
Yeah.
So we have to have the word mainframe for that reason. But generally speaking, it's been called IBM Z for, I'm going to say, since about 2015. But, IBM do like a good name change. We had Z series for quite a piece, probably about 5 or 7 years until rather infamously some toilets caught fire. And your Google searches at the time would have said, product IBM Z series recalled due to fire hazard. So the name was quite quickly changed to System Z, and then a bit later, that was discovered to be a septic tank product. So then it became Z Systems, and now it's just plain old IBM Z. And as you say, the Americans mispronounce it, but then they mispronounce a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, I think I've seen the Sesame Count Dracula, so I know how they pronounce the letters. But yeah, it's still. I mean, despite all of the predictions that have out there. I mean, that many people. I mentioned Tony Sacconaghi, who works for Alliance Bernstein, an investment research firm. He's done an analysis on the importance of it to IBM. Andrew Bartels from Forrester Research has been commented on many times on what's been happening with the mainframe and its impact on IBM's numbers. Yet, despite all of the doomsayers and other people talking the thing down, and even going back as far as 1991 with Stuart Alsop, it's still around. It's still there, and it's not going anywhere, is it? Can you give us a picture of the mainframe? Where is it in our lives, and how important is it to us?
I mean, there's a couple of things here, and that what's probably not always understood about the mainframe is that it distinctly is two different component parts. There's the hardware, and then the operating system or application enablement software. And IBM make quite good sized chunks of revenue and profit out of both parts. Probably what's masked a little better is the profit that comes from software, but you are tied to running IBM stack if you head down that enterprise mainframe road. But if you look at the landscape today, it's quite different from when I first started back in the late 70s. There were pretty much all the computing available was an IBM mainframe. End of story. There weren't choices. And as we got the delights of, Unix systems and other beasts, the Wintel estate, rolling in the 80s and early 90s, a lot of the companies that shouldn't really have been on a mainframe in the first place were able to get out. And so there was quite a decimation through the latter part of the 80s and the early 90s, where companies that shouldn't really be there in the first place, went to platforms that were appropriate. It is very much a horses for courses. I guess where we are today, and it's been stable in terms of its market base for probably about 20, 25 years, the odd new customer coming to the platform every year, which is highly celebrated. But generally, it's the same old protagonist, and they run their business on Z. To give you an example, every time you book an airline ticket, every time you hit a cash machine, $23 billion a year, $4 billion a day of ATM transactions are based on the mainframe. Every time you swipe a credit card or transfer money online, any of those things, at some point in that transaction, you are touching a mainframe. It would be arrogant to say that, or perhaps ist of some kind, to say that the mainframe handles all of the processing for all of those things, because we live in a not in a heterogeneous environment. We have IT that's made up of the right sized equipment, the right type of equipment, right the way through a transaction's life. But the mainframe is typically at the back end of all of those things. People like chucking out numbers, Thomas and Brendan, but 50 billion transactions a day on the mainframe. 60% of all enterprise applications need a mainframe to complete. 90% of all credit card transactions. But look, numbers are numbers. I could go on with all sorts of numbers. 10 out of 10 top insurers, 92% of the top 100 banks. 1.5 million KICS transactions per second. 1.5 million. Now, just to put some context on that, currently there's 70,000 Google searches per second. 70,000. And there's 1.5 million KICS transactions. It's a bit of a scale, isn't it?
Yeah. It's funny, and it gets very, very little publicity. I'm curious, though, you did say there that there's the odd new client. I always had the impression that it was the existing customers just struggle to get off the platform. So there are new people from time to time.
Yeah, it happens. I mean, sometimes it happens for odd reasons. Quite recently in the UK, actually, there was a brand new Z customer, and it was an art gallery.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I have this idea that the wonderful, beautiful, shiny black box that is the current IBM Z mainframe is somehow an installation in one of their galleries. Maybe spinning on an axis or hung from the ceiling with wires. I suspect that one was probably more of an ego trip, from the art galleries. It's not an art gallery, an art auction house, but I suspect it's an ego trip. But there's other examples of rather well publicised. A very large financial institution in the UK some years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, was very public about the fact they were migrating off the mainframe. And that was the press story, Computer World and all those sorts of journals talking about the migration off the mainframe. What wasn't said by the CEO was that they were migrating off a Unisys mainframe onto an IBM Z mainframe.
And can I ask a question there, Paul, on that topic of moving off the mainframe? So it has always been my impression and my experience dealing with IBM Mainframe clients is that the story in many of them is that they are trying desperately to get off the mainframe, as you describe it. I suspect that's what's fueled many of the stories around the decline of the mainframe, even going back as far as 1991. But you did mention there that throughout the 80s and 90s, many companies who were on a mainframe were able to get off the mainframe. Yet today, I suspect that's a much more challenging issue. And I'm wondering, why is that the case? What's happened to make that much more difficult than for the original guys to get off it?
I think the simple thing is that it's the 80-20 stuff, Thomas. The 80% of the customers that could do it easily did it really easily. And what's left are the hard ones. So how do you take, say a large bank, a Danske Bank or a Citigroup, how do you take them off the mainframe? The organizations that tend to still be on the mainframe are generally very risk averse. I mean, that is their business model. They have no choice but to be risk averse. And we saw this quite recently in the UK with Santander moving accounts out of Lloyd's, when part of the product set was purchased, and the disaster for many, many months for those account holders not being able to access funds. And that was the risk of taking a working system with real financial value in it, and moving it to an untried, untested platform. I mean, you can't. Production is the true testing environment. That, I guess, is the challenge for risk-averse organizations. So, if you were to take that, the public side of discussions around CEOs and CTOs saying we need to get off the mainframe. That's the public face. Privately, they would never countenance it. But it's a good story from a stock exchange point of view, from an investor point of view, to say they're getting off the mainframe, because the mainframe is always seen as having a very high capital cost. So it's about turning them from being high in capex down to maybe high in opex using other platforms, but not so high in capex. And that's the attraction from an investor point of view. So it's a really good public story to talk about getting off the mainframe, but privately, it's just never even countenanced by the bulk of the organizations.
And when you look at the stories that I was talking about earlier, the commentators who talk about like Andrew Bartels and Tony Takanagi, they talk about the profitability of the mainframe, and it's been profitable for so long, and I don't know how accurate these numbers are. Maybe you have a view on that. Perhaps you don't. You're not an investment person, but when you look at this and you see this stuff is going to be around forever, and the hype around some of the technology and some of the stories that Brendan was talking about earlier, this gets a poor rap, doesn't it? It generates a lot of cash.
Well, so it's kind of interesting. It's one of those, if I tell you about it, I got to kill you kind of stories. 92% of the world's business transactions touch a mainframe. 80% of the world's business data is backed on a mainframe, meaning the data is on a mainframe, right? Like, that's it. It's not somewhere else. It's on a mainframe. And worthwhile noting that Oracle doesn't run on a mainframe, right? So you think about our largest database providers, Oracle would be the one that would quite commonly come to mind. It doesn't play in the mainframe space, and yet there's a really interesting statistic. 80% of the world's business data is backed on a mainframe. It tells a bit of a story about the publicity one can garner, and actually what's really underneath the numbers. And when we look at all of that, the Gartner's view of spend, IT spend on the mainframe, is 7% of IT worldwide budget. So 92% of the transactions, 80% of the data, and 7% of the spend. It's almost an embarrassment to talk about the mainframe.
Yeah, and the story, Brendan, you had earlier on about laying people off. They must still need the skills, though, even though they're getting rid of many of these skills. I mean, many of those older employees you talked about earlier.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask the same question. Like, where's the talent? Because we know of the likes of yourself, Paul, but not only is the mainframe old, but the talent is getting older as well. So, is there a challenge there?
Yeah, it's a pretty significant challenge, Brendan. And it's a funny one. It's not really IBM's. People would like to blame IBM for it or put it on IBM's shoulders. It's one of the areas that I look at and think, well, come on, customers, what have you been doing for the last 25 years? The average age of Z engineers is, I'm talking about, the key people you need, not programmers, not business programmers, not business analysts, but the people that keep the show on the road. The software engineers, administrators of the system. The average age for those Z engineers in the US is 67.
Wow.
Now, that's a really interesting thought, isn't it? Now, these are people who have a different mental profile. They're older. We're all getting less, brain agile. We take a bit longer to react. I personally don't think I do, but I bet there's a lot of people who challenge that. We have health issues. Maybe people have got parents they have to look after. I think it's quite interesting when you start to talk about 67-year-olds being the thing that keeps your show on the road. One of the major UK banks had a pretty big incident a couple of years ago. Not something that was caused by their foul play or anything. It was a software deployment that went bad, and they had to call the whole crew in. So they spent Saturday and Sunday in every single resource they could get. They're all there. Monday morning, the building was empty because those people were tired. They were knackered. I remember doing, pulling 72-hour shifts and just keep going, putting the matchsticks in the eyes. But that was when I was wearing a younger man's clothes. It's harder to get those people to be able to consistently deliver and a lot of retired. A huge amount of retires. In Europe, we're slightly better off in Europe. The average age is about 62, but that's still pretty scary when you look at other platforms.
I was a COBOL programmer myself back in the day, Paul, and I don't think I'd be able for it anymore. But I was reading about in New York State, the unemployment benefit system was under strain because of COVID, payments, and the system there was like a 1,600% increase in claims processing, and they had to kind of search the market for mainframe programmers, especially those that were experts in COBOL.
It's a challenging one. Large corporates don't tend to think about the little guy, and this is a very small talent pool. So I think one of the challenges is in the 80s, particularly the early 80s, mainframe customers had a conveyor belt of rolling out new engineers. So they would start people on shifts in a data center, and they specifically employed people to move through their organization, very heavy training programs and so on. We got to the mid 80s, and the truth is we didn't need any more. We go and add another, double our capacity, put another 5 boxes on the floor, roll out a whole range of other services. And how many more engineers do we need? 0. Now, you contrast that with, say, a typical server market where, putting another server on the floor means you've got to buy another 5 people. And so it's very efficient at the human level. And therefore, the conveyor belt stopped. And that is why we have a real age profile problem in the Z industry, because we stopped producing more. I look around at, I think the youngest guy I work with, we call him the young guy, and he's about 45. There aren't very many people under the age of 50 working in the mainframe engineering space, and no one's doing anything to change that. Essentially what happens is a bit of cherry picking goes on. Someone steals a body from another company. They treat them badly at one company, and another bank will grab those people and then treat them badly, and then they'll move around. I mean, it is not, it's number one on most financial institutions' risk register, the age profile of their keep the show on the road people.
Yeah.
And it's scary. But you know what? The reason it's not really being addressed is quite simply to do with longevity of CEOs. So I'm the CEO of a very large organization. I'm looking at my risk register, and number one is mainframe skilled resources at engineering level. And I say, is that really going to cause me a problem? Yeah, it is. It really is a big problem. And when's it going to happen? Maybe in 2 years' time? I won't be here in 2 years' time. I'll have moved on to the next job. So It's not on their watch. And I think that's one of the benefits of capitalism, isn't it? You get to ignore the future and only concentrate on revenue today. And I think it is genuinely the biggest risk, to the platform. But actually, if it's a risk to the platform, I'd probably suggest you all keep a few £100 under your sofa as well, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. And you mentioned there about the CEOs making decisions that are short-term decisions, perhaps without taking into consideration the longer-term risks to the business. And I would imagine, because they're incented that way. I mean, IBM has a new CEO, Arvind Krishna, since the beginning of the year, taking over from Ginny Roberty. We used to like Ginny Roberty here on this show because she gave us lots of stories. But we're struggling to get stories on Arvind just yet. But I'm all joking aside, on IBM, one of the things we've talked about on this show, myself and Brendan, has been whether it's an option for IBM to break up the company. The new CEO, there will be, and the most should be, some major decisions that they'll make. I mean, obviously the acquisition of Red Hat last year was a major investment by the company. Mainframe, it just gets a bad rap, I think, given we're just talking about the level of importance of it, the level of profitability. It doesn't look like it's going away. I mean, to me, if I was brought in as a CEO, one of the options I'd certainly be looking at is saying, right, let's break this company, break out the mainframe element, and let's give it a better image, dress it up, because many companies have managed to do that with what appeared as staid and old kind of businesses and refresh them. Particularly if they're going to be knocking around for another couple of years, there's no reason, and it could still a bit of life back into the market. And actually, from an investment perspective, it throws off a lot of cash. and they could get a lot of investors behind it and actually be a real story as opposed to a lot of hot air.
Well, it's a tricky one in that, why would you want to break up something that's making you most of your profit? And of course that's a story you don't really want to tell too loudly. When we look, if anyone actually understands IBM's accounting rules, then that I think that they're from outer space. It's I've seen a lot of strange accounting practices. IBM's are intentionally obfuscated, and I think that's even internally, let alone externally. But if they do crazy things with their numbers. They get a piece of bad business, and they hide it under IBM Z to make Z look bad, so it doesn't report so well. Like for example, any of their bad GTS outsourcing deals. If there's got a mainframe anywhere in the estate, then they put the entire revenue stack into the mainframe bill, so they can try and somehow artificially reduce what it looks like from a profitability perspective. If you cut it up into just the hardware and the software rather than all of the bad bits that go into the way they report, the guys on the inside say it's around about 30%. Z is about 30% of revenue. But even more scary, it's getting closer to 80% of the profit. So it's one of those things that you asked earlier, why don't we know about it? We don't want to tell you about it. Is kind of IBM's view. That there's a lot of moaning about the mainframe, but actually there's secretly or hidden inside the organization a phenomenal amount of pleasure, and most of the spot making in terms of making club, making target from an OTE perspective amongst their very wide sales force. It comes from Z, and it's very much a pyramid base. So one little Z sale over here, which is actually quite big revenue numbers, gives revenue recognition to 2,000 people up a chain. So there's no great appetite within IBM to get rid of Z, but to break it up is something IBM have tried time and again and failed miserably. I'm not really quite sure I understand why you'd want to break it up, unless you're trying to divest yourselves of the non-profitable bits. Sam Palisano spent pretty much all of his 12-year tenure trying to break. It's kind of crazy, really. He had 12 years in charge, and he tried to break it into 12 pieces, and that failed miserably. IBM's execs as well, if you think about it, you've got this new fella in charge. You're looking for stories about him, quoting that the one quote that stuck out to me recently is he declared that clients prefer OPEX to CAPEX. I mean, I don't know what the context of the statement was, but wow. Like that's pretty crazy as a statement, right? How can you be so black and white about such a complicated topic? In my experience, I think both are under pressure terribly, but OPEX seems to be the one that's more aggressively challenged in most of my accounts. So, and you commented on the 69% increase, 69% increase in Z revenue last year for one quarter. It's 69% up. But none of the statistics or numbers tell you what it's up from, and they don't tell you what that number is. It's just the 69% up. And I got to say, whenever I see numbers like 42 or 69 or 45 expressed as a percentage increase, I think, that's just made up, that number.
I like it, Paul. I like it. One last question, Paul. It's fascinating stuff. One last question. What's the future then?
To be frank, I can't see it changing. I mean, I think what will change is people like me will eventually lose their appetite and not turn up to work anymore. I don't know how that's going to be resolved. There isn't a way of automating or autonomic. I mean, there's a lot of good stories at the CEO level about we will make this an autonomic platform. The truth is, you need an engineer to do that. So, the very problem is going to be resolved, but it needs the very people that is the problem, So it's a bit of it's a lovely lipstick story to say, we're running the master the mainframe competition and all these kind of wonderful stories IBM come up with, but in essence, the customers aren't doing anything themselves about that big skills challenge, and I think that is the big risk. I suspect one of the change areas is going to have to be in the software costs. Software costs have been obfuscated for far too long. Particularly, I mean, on any platform, but in the Z space, the idea that there's no such thing as a price list and it's really just made up based on what they think the customer can afford, is very old school, and it's not something that I think really has a place in today's commercial world. Transparency, I think, guys, is what IBM are starting to get a lot of pressure from customers. I've seen a lot of deals in the last 5 or 6 years where historically, the enterprise license agreements and other contractual artifacts had no transparency. You had a bottom line sort of smorgasbord price, and it didn't matter what you took out or put in, the numbers really never changed. And I think that didn't give customers the flexibility or commercial flexibility, so they couldn't make decent commercial decisions about what was a valid place to put their IT requirements. Platform-wise, when it came to the mainframe, and I think that's changing, and I think that's just a groundswell, to be frank, from lots of good procurement people trying to do the right thing by getting their customers a better picture of what their costs actually are. And once you've got a picture of the cost, you can start to think about the value and whether TCO is good on it, TCA is bad, and so on. The challenge of the focus from CEOs is not going to change. They are predominantly people who struggle to run a fruit machine, an Apple. They don't really know what a computer is, so how would they ever get a grasp about a mainframe? And yet they're put in on the spot to give, corporate-wide statements about computing futures. They have to say things like cloud because they can understand it. They know what a cloud is. They've seen them on their walk to work. So they get to talk about terms like a cloud and terms like agility and DevOps and all these wonderful things. But actually, there's a lot of emperor's new clothes around that stuff. I would say the future, I just don't think it's going to change. I think the customers that run mainframes rely on them and actually secretly quite like what they get out of it. They're going to keep putting pressure on IBM to be more transparent, and they're going to keep putting pressure on IBM to manage the costs in a different way. But I actually can't see it going anywhere.
Well, I think it's a topic we definitely will.
Fascinating.
We'll come back to again for sure, because it's certainly one we'd like to see. Will it change? We'll watch this space. Maybe Arvind Krishna might make a change there, and we will definitely come back to the topic at that point. Paul, it's been fascinating talking to you. Your own business, TSD. You obviously, I'm assuming you're still doing well. You're still doing. Are you still doing the same things? Are you doing anything different these days?
Not a huge amount of difference. Part of the business model for quite a long time was delivering training, actually, for IBM, training IBMers. But that model is, we have a very old workforce, and so they know everything already. So I'd say that the training side of the business has diminished, quite significantly in the last 4 or 5 years. But at the same time, the high level engineering work that we offer in terms of consultancy, and we do offer a little bit on the procurement side of things as well. Not to support any of the vendors, really just to help support the procurement departments understand the differences that hit the Z platform, and that seems to be growing. But also, I guess there's an element of appetite, guys. Like I say, we're all getting older.
Yeah.
I like to play a bit more golf and maybe work a little less.
It's good to
I'd like to play better golf.
Yeah, you do need to work on your golf. That's true.
But I'm not a dreamer. I'm more of a realist. I just like to play more golf.
Yeah. We'll get you over here for a game when the airlines are back running properly again and we can all travel. We look forward to that, Paul. Listen, great to talk to you. Fascinating topic. A lot more on this topic. We kind of run out of time here, Brendan. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
We've run out of time here, Brendan. We are end of September. The sun is still shining here in Dublin.
Yeah, Indian summer.
Yeah.
Today.
I think by the time we meet again on this podcast, it might not be so nice outside.
A bit slightly more bleak.
How do you feel now?
I feel a lot better now, actually. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the end of the week.
I always told you that the podcast was good for you.
Yeah, it was. It was great listening to Paul. Very knowledgeable, very interesting. So, I'm uplifted by the experience of today's show.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you, Brendan. Thanks to all the people listening. And we look forward to talking to you all in about a month's time.
Yeah,
Take care.
Folks.
Bye.